Okay, let's start with the mental image. You've just finished this massive, massive project.
Yay.
A war, a movement, maybe a startup launch, whatever it is. You've written the handbook. You've defined all the rules.
Yeah.
The mission accomplished banner is unfurled. And you think, finally, we can just live.
The credits are supposed to roll.
Yes.
The music swells. Everyone goes home happy. Story's over.
Exactly. We are, I think, conditioned to think of history, and especially the history of big ideas, as having this clear finish line. A moment where the struggle ends and, the stability begins. But today, we are diving into a source that just flips that narrative completely upside down.
Completely.
We're looking at a text called Texto Colado, and it's this incredibly sparse, almost poetic window into a moment in history that really should have been the happy ending.
But it wasn't. Instead, it was the start of a much more complicated, much messier chapter.
And that's the mission of this deep dive, to understand a very specific paradox that's mentioned right there in the text.
Yeah.
Agreement did not end conflict.
Such a powerful line.
It is. We're going to unpack what happens when a belief system, when it wins. What happens when a movement grows large enough to be powerful, and the specific dangerous complications that come with that.
Yeah.
And they don't come from enemies trying to destroy you.
No.
They come from the reality of your own success.
It's the crisis of victory. The source opens with this killer hook. The faith had been defined. And you read that and you think, great, clarity, it's done.
Right. Check that box.
But the very next beat is, but agreement did not end conflict. And that just stops you in your tracks.
That is the core tension we are exploring today. And, this isn't just a history lesson. This is really a case study on organizational behavior, on politics, and the corruption of influence.
Absolutely.
We're looking at a stack of notes in the specific source text that analyzes the transition of early Christianity from a, let's say, persecuted outsider
to an imperial insider. And that transition is just crucial.
Everything.
It is. If you look closely at the source material, it paints a picture of a movement that spent its early years just worrying about survival. It was an external game.
Us against the world.
Us against the world. Us against the lions. But as it grew, the text highlights this major shift. The danger stopped coming from the outside, and it started growing on the inside.
It's the shift from fighting for your life to fighting for control.
Precisely. The text uses this phrase that I think frames our whole discussion. It talks about the transition from things being whispered in secret to being debated in public.
Which sounds like progress, right? Coming out of the shadows.
You'd think so.
I mean, transparency is usually good. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, all of that.
Of course. But the text argues that this transition, it introduced a chaotic new dynamic the movement just wasn't built for.
Okay.
When you move from the private sphere to the public square, the rules of engagement change entirely. Then it teases the major turning point, the empire.
And usually when we hear empire in these stories, we immediately think of the villain.
The bad guy.
The boot on the neck. The Death Star. But here, the source suggests something far more insidious. The empire stops persecuting the church and starts trying to control it.
Which, as we'll see, is a far, far more dangerous position to be in.
How so?
Well, when the enemy stops firing arrows and starts offering you funding, that's when you really have to start worrying.
Okay, so just to set the tone for everyone listening. This is about power. It's about language. It's about how human nature complicates unity, even when you think you all agree.
And the source style is very poetic. It's these short, punchy sentences like exile replaced execution.
Right. And our job today is to slow down and unpack the dense reality behind those few words.
That phrase alone, exile replaced execution. I mean, we could spend the whole hour on just the political implications of that one switch.
We just might.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. Let's dive into section 1, the evolution of conflict.
Let's do it.
So the text draws this sharp contrast we just touched on. What was once whispered in secret was now debated in public. I want to challenge that idea that public is always better. Whispered in secret implies danger, sure.
Of course.
But it also implies a kind of intimacy, doesn't it?
It implies a very specific kind of acoustics, both physically and, socially.
Acoustics, I like that.
When you are whispering, you are close. You
Yeah.
have to be. You're huddled in a basement or a catacomb. The circle of trust is tight because it has to be.
Right.
If you're there, you are 100% committed. You aren't arguing about the nuances of, the font on the invite. You're just trying to survive the night.
Right. Survival enforces consensus. It has to. If we are under attack, our minor disagreements just don't matter. We are brothers and sisters in the foxhole.
Exactly. That external pressure acts like a corset. It holds everything together really tightly. But the text says, as Christianity grew, new voices emerged. And this is the critical breakdown of that intimacy. Expansion destroys the monolith. Suddenly, the room isn't just the core group of survivors anymore. You have people coming in from different educational backgrounds, different social classes, different, philosophical traditions.
So you have a Greek philosopher sitting next to a Roman soldier who's sitting next to a merchant from Alexandria.
And they all interpret that original whisper differently.
Of course they do.
Unity stops being a survival mechanism and starts becoming a negotiation. And that leads to the next crucial line in the source. Some challenged the creeds. Others reshaped doctrine to fit power.
Okay, that's a huge moment in the text right there.
It is.
I think we often assume that once the faith was defined, once the rule book was written, everyone just sort of read it and nodded.
Yeah.
Like, oh, okay, thanks for the memo.
Right, got it. We're all on the same page now.
But the text suggests the exact opposite. The moment the definition was written down, it became a target.
Because now there was something specific to attack, something concrete.
Explain that.
Well, when a belief is vague and it's whispered, everyone can project their own meaning onto it. I can think it means X, you think it means Y, and as long as we don't say it too loud, we're fine.
We can coexist in the ambiguity.
Exactly.
It's like when you and a friend both say you like good movies, but you realize later you meant quiet art house dramas, and they meant
explosive action flicks.
Like,
you only realize the difference when you actually try to pick a movie.
Right. The act of choosing, of defining, exposes the crack.
Precisely. And so when it's written down in black and white or, debated in the public square, suddenly I see that you define divinity very differently than I do. And the text says, heresy was no longer hidden. It was confronted.
Confronted, that feels very aggressive. It's not discussed, it's confronted.
It is. It signals a major shift in strategy. The movement wasn't hiding from the world anymore. It was engaging in internal policing.
Internal policing.
Wow. It wasn't about surviving the lions in the arena. It was about surviving the argument in the lecture hall. It became an intellectual war.
And the mechanism for this confrontation, the source gives us this really vivid image. Bishops argued, councils multiplied.
Councils multiply. I was just visualize that for a second. We aren't talking about a quick chat over coffee.
No.
We are talking about the bureaucratization of belief, crowded halls of debate, replacing those hidden, intimate basements.
It sounds exhausting.
It sounds like a committee meeting that has been running for 300 years.
Yeah, with the highest possible stakes.
Unbelievably high. Because now we get to that line we flagged in the intro. The result of these councils, it wasn't just a memo. The text says, exile replaced execution.
Okay, we need to really pull this apart. Exile replaced execution. On the surface, if I'm a dissenter, I'm taking exile every single time.
Of course, you get to live.
I keep my head. It sounds like progress. It sounds, frankly, like mercy.
In a biological sense, yes, you keep your pulse, you keep your life. But think about the symbolic shift the source is pointing to here. Execution martyrdom is what you do to an enemy you fear, but you can't convert.
Right.
And paradoxically, when you execute a leader for their beliefs, what do you create?
You create a legend. You validate their struggle. You make them a hero. If you kill me for my beliefs, you've just proven that my beliefs are powerful enough to be scared of.
Exactly. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church, as the old saying goes. You kill the rebel, you amplify the message. Mm-hmm. But exile is different. It's a political removal. It's a silencing. It says, you aren't dangerous enough to kill. You are just irrelevant.
Wow.
We are going to put you on an island where no one can hear you.
That is actually much colder. It's strategic irrelevance. It's saying you don't matter enough to kill.
It implies the stakes had changed. It wasn't a battle for life and death survival anymore. It was a battle for influence and for platform.
Who gets the microphone?
Who gets the microphone?
Yeah.
As the source notes, some were silenced, others were elevated. It's all about who gets to speak and who gets erased.
It's deplatforming. It's the ancient version of getting kicked off Twitter or banned from the server.
That's a great way to put it.
You aren't dead, but you can't speak to the crowd anymore. You are ghosted by the institution.
And that is a hallmark of a powerful institution. A weak, panicked institution kills its enemies. A strong, confident institution simply removes their access to the public. It's a game of power.
So it's not about truth anymore.
It's about volume, who gets to be heard.
Which sets up the next major theme in the source just perfectly. Because once you start deciding who gets the microphone and who gets sent to the island, you are playing a very dangerous game.
You are.
This leads us right into section 2, the trap of influence.
And the source puts it so bluntly. The church gained influence, and influence brought temptation.
It's the classic trope, isn't it? The underdog wins and becomes the very thing they hated.
It is, but the source puts a specific intellectual spin on it. It goes back to that earlier line. Others reshaped doctrine to fit power.
And that is just a devastating critique. Reshaping doctrine to fit power.
It's brutal.
It sounds like editing a script to please the studio executives. Or a startup pivoting their entire mission statement just to get that Series B funding.
That is a great analogy. It suggests that beliefs weren't just changing because of some, spiritual revelation or a new scholarly reading of the text.
Yeah.
They were changing because of political utility, because it was convenient for the doctrine to say X instead of Y, because X kept the peace, or X pleased the emperor, or X secured a tax break.
It becomes transactional.
Completely.
I will believe this if it secures my funding, my protection, my status.
Precisely. And speaking of the emperor, the source gives us this line, political leaders intervened. And then this one, theology mixed with authority.
That mix is volatile. It's like oil and water, or maybe more like gasoline in a match.
Yes.
I'm picturing a grassroots movement, something that started in a garage purely for the love of the game, whatever it is.
Pure passion.
And then suddenly it gets a massive government contract and a board of directors appointed by the state.
The dynamic changes immediately, instantly. You aren't answering to your conscience or your community anymore.
Who are you answering to?
You're answering to a hierarchy, to a system. You have to start considering the optics of your beliefs. You have to wonder, how will this play in the palace?
And the source points out the great irony here. It says, the same empire that once persecuted the church now attempted to control it.
This is the pivot point of the entire text. It's the central irony. The empire realized, probably through trial and error, that persecution just wasn't working.
It was backfiring.
It was only making the faith stronger. It was creating those martyrs we talked about. It was giving them a story. So what's the alternative strategy?
It's the corporate merger strategy.
If you can't beat them, buy them. Or at least manage them. The control wasn't about destruction anymore. It was about co-opting.
So the empire essentially said, okay, you're powerful, you have the people's hearts and minds, we need that power to help stabilize the state.
So come inside, sit at the table, have some wine.
But there is a cost to sitting at that table.
Always.
You don't get the seat for free. The text notes that unity became fragile under this exact pressure.
Because the test had changed. The source explicitly says the faith was tested not by persecution, but by power.
And power is a much harder test, isn't it?
Oh, much.
We always think the hard test is the torture, the prison, the lions. But the source is arguing that the hard test is the banquet. It's the promotion.
Incredibly so. Persecution clarifies things. It forces clarity. It binds you together against a common enemy. It simplifies the entire world into us versus them.
There's a purity in that.
There is. It strips away the ego because you are all just victims together. But power splinters you. It introduces ambition.
How so?
It introduces jealousy. It introduces politics. Why is he the bishop of that wealthy city and I'm stuck out here in the provinces?
Right. Why did he get the better office?
Why does the emperor listen to him and not me? It introduces the need to compromise, not for truth, but just to maintain your position. When you're being persecuted, you have nothing to lose.
But when you have power,
you have everything to lose. Your status, your comfort, your access.
That is such a key distinction. The fear of loss starts driving the behavior.
Exactly. And that fear of loss, losing influence, losing the emperor's ear, losing that tax exemption, that is what drives the reshaping of doctrine the text talks about.
You start smoothing out the rough edges.
You make it fit the container of the empire. You make your belief system palatable. You make it useful to the state. And the parts that aren't useful...
We get whispered again. Or forgotten.
Or exiled.
So we have this internal fracturing, this vertical pressure of power coming down from the top. But the source also points to a horizontal fracturing, a geographical one.
Yes.
And this brings us to section 3, the geography of belief.
The text notes, Eastern and Western traditions began to drift. Not a sudden break, but a drift, like two continents slowly moving apart.
I love that the source lists specific causes for this drift. It doesn't just say they disagreed, it gets into the mechanics of why they disagreed. And the first cause is fascinating. Language divided theology.
That is a profound insight. Language divided theology. It sounds so abstract. But if you think about the practical implications, we aren't just talking about Google Translate errors here.
Break that down for us. How does language, just the words you use, actually create a theological divide?
Well, historically, the church in the East was primarily speaking and thinking in Greek. The church in the West was speaking and thinking in Latin.
Okay.
And these aren't just different sets of vocabulary words. They represent different ways of thinking. They are, in essence, different operating systems for the brain.
Okay. Tell me more about the Greek operating system. What's it like?
Greek is the language of philosophy, of nuance, of abstraction, of fluidity. It has, for example, multiple very specific words for love or for knowledge or for concepts like essence or being.
So it's built for fine distinctions.
It is. It's designed to explore the abstract, the mystical. It's very comfortable with paradox. It can hold two seemingly contradictory ideas at the same time.
And Latin, the Western operating system.
Latin is the language of law. It's the language of the Roman Empire, of engineering, of administration. It's rigid, it's precise, it's structural, it's about definitions, boundaries, and contracts. It wants a clear yes or no.
So when you try to take a fluid, mystical Greek concept about, say, the nature of the divine, and you translate it into legalistic Latin.
You're forcing a round peg into a square hole. You're trying to nail Jell-O to a wall.
Or you're trying to translate a poem into legal contract.
That's a perfect analogy. You might get the literal meaning across, but you lose the vibe. You lose the spirit. You lose the ambiguity that maybe made the original concept work in the first place.
So the translation itself changes the meaning.
It calcifies it. What was a flowing river in Greek becomes a brick wall in Latin. So over decades and then centuries, the East reads the text and sees a profound mystery to be experienced.
And the West reads the same text.
And sees a divine law to be obeyed. They develop different priorities. The West becomes obsessed with questions of sin and justice and payment legal concepts. The East becomes more focused on union with the divine, on mysticism, philosophical concepts.
And eventually they look across the Mediterranean at each other and say, you aren't even practicing the same religion as me.
Your terms don't make sense to me, your priorities are all wrong, and it all started with just a different set of words.
That is wild. And the source adds another layer on top of that. It says, culture-shaped belief.
Right. It's not just language, it's the air you breathe. The environment shapes the interpretation of the truth.
If you are in the East, in Constantinople or Alexandria, you are surrounded by ancient mysticism, by the living legacy of Plato and Aristotle. Your whole world is steeped in philosophy.
Exactly. And if you're in the West, in Rome or Gaul, you're dealing with the slow collapse of the Roman Empire. You're dealing with barbarian invasions, the breakdown of society, the need for order above all else.
So your faith adapts to solve the problems you have right in front of you.
Yes. If your world is falling into chaos, you crave a theology of order, of structure, of clear rules. If your world is relatively stable and cosmopolitan, you might have the luxury of craving a theology of transcendence and mystery.
So it's not just that they were reading different books. They were living in fundamentally different worlds. Their truth was being shaped to solve different existential problems.
Correct. And the tragedy, as the source points out so poignantly, is this. What was meant to preserve truth sometimes fueled division.
That's a heartbreaking line. Say it again.
What was meant to preserve truth sometimes fueled division.
It goes back to those councils we talked about earlier.
It does. They were calling these huge, expensive, difficult meetings to define the truth, to lock it down, to put a fence around it and keep it safe from error, to say, this is exactly what we believe, word for word, no exceptions.
But by locking it down so tightly,
the harder they squeezed, the more it slipped through their fingers. By defining things so strictly in one language, using one cultural framework, they alienated the other.
They created an in-group and an out-group without even meaning to.
Right. If you force a Greek speaker to sign a Latin contract about the nature of God, they might sign it to keep the peace, but they won't feel it in their bones. They won't understand it the same way. The very attempt to unify everyone under one specific definition ended up pushing the two sides further and further apart.
It's the law of unintended consequences. You try to build a wall to keep the garden safe, and you end up cutting off the sunlight.
Well said.
You try to define a relationship too strictly, and you end up choking the life out of it.
That's a beautiful way to put it. The definition became a wall. And instead of a bridge between East and West, the creeds and the councils, they became a border.
But, and there is a but here, the source doesn't present this as a total failure. We have to be fair to the history here.
That's right.
Section 4 is about endurance through struggle. The text pivots. It says, yet even in conflict, the church endured.
And it's really important we don't miss this part. The conflict wasn't fatal. In fact, the source seems to argue it was, on some level, necessary.
Necessary how?
It suggests that without this friction, without the arguments, the movement might have just dissolved into a vague, feel-good mist. It would have had no substance.
It says, debate, refined doctrine. Struggle, clarified belief.
Refined and clarified. Those are active, positive words. That's not destruction, that's creation. It implies that without the fight, the belief would have remained whispered and vague and undefined.
So the argument was the fire that forged the steel. It made the whole thing stronger.
Precisely. Conflict isn't presented as purely negative in the source material. It acts as a stress test for ideas. You don't really know what you believe or how strong that belief is until you have to defend it against a really smart opponent.
That's true. Until someone stands up in the council and says, I disagree, and here are 3 well-reasoned arguments why.
Yeah.
You don't really have to think that hard about it. You just coast.
Yes. That struggle forces you to be precise. It forces you to go back to your sources. It forces you to articulate why you believe what you believe, not just that you believe it.
So in a weird way, the heresy helped the orthodoxy.
It did. The disagreement helped define the agreement. If everyone had just nodded along from day one, the philosophy never would have developed the intellectual depth that it did. It would have remained shallow, a slogan, not a system.
So the heretics actually performed a vital service. By being wrong, at least in the eyes of the majority, they forced the majority to figure out what right actually was in painstaking detail.
Exactly. They provided the resistance against which the muscle of the theology was built. Without resistance, muscles atrophy.
But there is a cost. We keep coming back to this. Let's call it the cost of clarity. You get a clarified belief, sure. You get a nice, thick, logically consistent book of theology. But what do you lose in the process?
You lose the easy unity. You lose the simplicity. You lose that whispered secret intimacy that we started with.
You lose the ability to just sit in a room together and not worry about the definitions.
You lose the ambiguity that allows for a bigger tent. The clearer the definition, the more people find themselves on the outside of it.
And the text loops us right back to that initial idea. Agreement did not end conflict. It seems conflict is presented here not as a bug, but as a feature of growth.
It's a trade-off. It's an unavoidable trade-off. You trade the cozy silence of the catacombs for the noisy, messy, powerful, and divided reality of the public square.
You can have intimacy or you can have influence.
But it's very, very hard to have both at the same time.
So let's try to pull this all together.
Yeah.
We've gone on quite a journey through this texto colado. It's incredible how much narrative is packed into these spare short lines.
We have. It's a masterclass in historical compression, really.
We started with a faith that was defined, and we thought that was the end of the story, the mission accomplished moment. But we learned that the act of definition actually kicked off a whole new era of noise. We went from whispered in secret to debated in public.
And we saw the rise of internal policing, that shift from execution, which creates martyrs and heroes, to exile, which creates silence and irrelevance.
Which is such a sophisticated political act. It's not just violent, it's strategy.
Right. It's the realization that silencing someone can be more effective than killing them.
Then we dove into the trap of influence. We saw how the empire stopped fighting the church and started hugging it to death.
How influence brought temptation and theology mixed with authority.
And we saw how easy it is to start reshaping your core beliefs when power and funding and status are on the line.
Then we moved to the geographical drift. How language and culture acted like these slow-moving continental plates, just gradually pulling the East and the West apart until they couldn't see each other anymore.
And how the very words we use to preserve truth can end up building walls between us because we literally cannot translate our deepest experiences to one another.
A tragedy of language.
But ultimately, we saw that the structure held. It endured. The struggle clarified the belief, even if it shattered the unity.
Which brings us to the final and maybe the most important lesson of the source. The transition from a persecuted minority to a powerful institution brought temptation and fragile unity.
It's a warning, isn't it?
It's a huge warning. It warns us that success is often more dangerous to a movement's soul than failure. Failure purifies, success complicates, and often corrupts.
And the source leaves us with this final, really provocative thought.
Yeah.
It doesn't wrap it all up with a neat bow. It doesn't say, and then they fixed it all.
Not at all.
It says, the seeds of future division were sown.
That's the lingering note it ends on, the seeds of future division.
It's chilling, in a way, because we tend to look at history as a series of solved problems. We think, oh, they had that council, they wrote that creed, problem solved, next chapter.
But this text suggests that the solutions themselves, the councils, the definitions, the influence, the power structures, those were the seeds for the next set of problems.
So every solution creates a new problem.
Exactly. The rigid definition you create today to stop a heresy becomes the rigid wall that causes a major schism tomorrow. The political alliance you make to survive becomes the chain that binds you later on.
It really challenges the whole idea of fixing things once and for all. It suggests that perfect, permanent stability is just an illusion.
It does. It suggests history is a cycle, a process of solving one tension only to create another. We are always planting the seeds of the next conflict in the soil of our current victory.
So the challenge to you, the listener, as you go about your week, is to think about that cycle in your own world. We often strive for influence, for clarity, for our ideas to be debated in public.
We want to win. We want the empire, whatever that looks like for us, to finally get on our side.
But the source asks us to consider the cost of winning, to be aware of the temptations that come with success.
So ask yourself, where in your world does influence bring temptation? Where does language divide your team or your family or your community?
And here's the tough one. Where are you planting seeds of future division right now, thinking that you are just solving today's problem? What walls are you building today that someone, maybe even you, will have to tear down in 20 years?
That is the question to sit with.
A huge thank you to the Techno Source for giving us so much to think about today. It's amazing how much you can get out of just a few lines of text when you really stop and listen to what they're saying.
It really is. It forces you to read between the lines, and that's where the real story is.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.